Good afternoon. Um, Welcome to our in-person and online attendees. I'm quite thrilled to organize this seminar on the risk management and cybersecurity. Those of you that don't know me, I'm Mayur Patel. I lead our quality and regulatory side of the offering in PA. I have about 20 years of experience, and this subject is quite close to me as a clinical scientist, where I worked in the NHS for early part of the career, where we did not necessarily have the funds or resources to have following every single standard. And the one standard that I followed to the line was ISO 14971. And then 20 years later, it's still the same standard. It's just that the complexity and the technologies have evolved. So the past 11 years is with PA, my learnings from clinical side and working with the regulators that I've been utilizing to support the medtech and pharma clients, and quite excited to see the diverse group of people. I know that we have got a large group of CMR here, but I know we got a drug delivery as well as diagnostics as well. So it's a quite diverse group, and we got tea, coffee, and everything at the back. So please help yourself with that. And before we jump into the agenda, I just wanted to talk briefly about PA. Some of you who haven't either worked in PA or know PA already, we are about 4,000 people, innovation and transformation consulting firm. And we support our clients to solve their most complex problems to generate some more tangible results. And this building, this is our technology innovation. It's an innovation and technology center where we physically develop products, technologies, processes, and they vary from cutting-edge robotic systems to one that I was describing about colonoscope, robotic colonoscope, to most complex drug delivery devices to a PCR system. And we cover across all part of the product development lifecycle stages. And we have also collaborated with Vision on medtech safety, and we got some common clients, and we got an opportunity as well to work with Vision on this particular seminar. So this is a great opportunity to have him here with us and do that. And I think Vision does not need any introduction. He's a very well-known, I guess everybody here online and in person probably know him and read his book on risk management, and he's a superstar in this, rock star in the this area. So I'm quite excited to have him here. And along with Vision, we got Andy, and he inspires me all the time when I see his LinkedIn every week. He has got a new certificate. Despite 30 years of experience, he's learning, and that inspires me to continue to keep up with the new trends, new technologies, and all that. So quite excited to have this session, and there would be more opportunity for networking sessions. So please feel free throughout the 2.5 hours when we have breaks to share ideas, any questions, and so forth. So quite excited, and pass it on to Bijan.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mayur. I appreciate PA Consulting hosting this and making it happen. So thank you for that. I am going to share my screen so that people online can also see. Okay. So during the session, Stephen is monitoring the chat, by the way. I'm not going to read the chat while I'm talking. So if there are any questions online, you can type them in and he'll alert me if it needs an immediate answer, or we're going to have a Q&A session after my piece of the talk, and then another Q&A session after Andy speaks. So multiple opportunities. So Very happy to be here, delighted, and thank you for coming to attend the session, and also people online, thank you for joining us. My name is Bijan Elahi. Oh, can you see the screen okay online? I think I'm sharing, right? You can see, okay, yeah. My name is Bijan Elahi. I am a technical fellow and an affiliate professor and an author on the subject of medical device risk management. Today, I'll give you some deeper insights in some areas of risk management that are less clear, maybe, but this is not a comprehensive course. I do teach a comprehensive course, but that takes 24 hours of classroom instruction, and today we only have 1 hour, so we'll touch on some things. The slide deck will be distributed afterwards to people online too. We'll email it to you, and session is being recorded, as you noticed, perhaps. So that's it as far as the basics. So before I start the talk, I'll give you a little introduction to myself for those people who maybe don't know me. Look, my background is actually from aerospace. I worked in aviation and space. I worked at NASA. And about 30 years ago, I transitioned to the medtech industry. And it was mostly because aerospace was 40 years ahead of medtech as far as risk management. So they asked for help. I ended up, through some events, eventually just starting to work there. I am an engineer, a systems engineer, and a medical device product developer. Am I blocking your view? Maybe I should be standing over here. Product developer. I've developed a number of products, mostly class 3 implantables, such as implantable pacemakers and defibrillators, and a deep brain stimulator for Parkinson's disease. Also, a kidney dialysis system, and peritoneal dialysis system. So what I teach is really about real-world techniques and best practices. I have worked and taught at a large number of companies worldwide, from small startups to the world's largest medtech companies. And here's a sampling of them. I used to live in the Netherlands, but now I live in America. I live in Florida, based there, but I teach everywhere. This week I'm teaching in Europe. I've trained over 10,000 people now in my classrooms, and so I'm the best practices and the latest knowledge based on real life experience. So as I mentioned, I used to live in the Netherlands, and while I was there, I started teaching in universities. And there are 2 universities in the Netherlands that I teach. One is in Delft, Department of Electrical Engineering, and the other one is the graduate school at Eindhoven, TU Eindhoven, where I teach a graduate course to doctoral students in engineering. It's a 2-credit-hour graduate course. And after I moved back to America, the FDA contacted me and said that, would you consider teaching in America too? They had heard that I teach in Europe. And by the way, there are very few universities worldwide that offer risk management training. And this is something that companies want in their employees, because this is, as you know, risk management is fundamental to our work. And hardly anybody has formal training in universities. So it's growing slowly. But anyway, so that's how it started. The FDA asked me to teach in America. And now I teach at Drexel University Graduate School of Biomedical Engineering as well. As Mayor mentioned, ISO 14971 is the central standard for risk management, and I contribute to the construction and input to that. Lastly, I've written 2 books on this subject, edition 1 and edition 2. The purple one is the second edition. It's published actually by Elsevier Publishing right here in the UK, in London. And they've been telling me that it's one of the best-selling books in the genre of medical books. Happy to hear that. Now I'll get into the presentation itself. We'll talk about some particular areas in risk management in accordance with ISO 14971. So this standard, ISO 14971, is the central standard for risk management worldwide. It is recognized both in the United States by the FDA and in the European community. Now, all medical device manufacturers have to get their products approved by a regulator, depending on what geography they want to sell. And in order to get that approval, they have to show that they have done formal risk management and applied it to these products. And in that process, they show that the risks have been reduced to acceptable levels, and then they can get approval. Prior to ISO 14971, there was no standard for risk management. And as I mentioned, I've been doing risk management for more than 30 years in medtech, so the standard has only been around for 24 years. So before then, my experience, medical device companies were doing whatever they could. It was haphazard. Some people would do fault tree analysis. Some people would do failure modes and effects analysis. Some people would do just qualitative descriptions and judgments. And of course, this was not only hard on the manufacturers, it was also hard on the regulators because they didn't know how to judge. But when the standard finally came out, it helped everybody because now the regulators know on what basis to accept or not accept a device for approval. One of the strengths of ISO 14971 is that it's flexible. It does not give you a one-size-fits-all solution. It gives you a framework of the things that it expects you to do, and then it allows each company to create a customized standard operating procedure internal to their company that is suitable optimally to their products. So this is, I think, one of the strengths of 14971. And of course, if you can imagine, it's almost impossible for standards committees to write a standard that is going to be perfectly satisfactory and useful for every product ever made in the past or will be made in the future, because they can't even imagine what is going to happen in the future. So they only can give you a framework. So the things that the framework requires you to do are several things. One of them is that you have to establish, implement, document, and maintain a risk management process in your company. And this is your SOP. And you have to apply this to your entire life cycle of the product, from the initial concept to the design and development, manufacturing, maintenance, decommission, and disposal. So the whole birth to death of a medical device. One of the interesting things about ISO 14971 is that although it does not expect you to have a QMS, you can have a no quality management system and still apply 14971. EU MDR and ISO 13485 do expect you to have a QMS. So in practice, most companies, every company that I've run into, have their risk management process as part of their QMS because they need to comply to EU MDR. I mean, you guys are in Europe, so you do. So let's talk about the framework of ISO 14971. I'm going to talk about the elements that you're expected to do, and then I will go deeper in some parts of it. First, the process has to be documented. So your SOP has to be documented, naturally. Your process should require you to have a plan, a risk management plan. Seems reasonable. Then it says you have to identify the hazards and hazardous situations for your device. This is not as easy because basically you have to predict what hazards your device will present to your patients or your users. And then what situations can they get into? And for your device, estimate and evaluate the individual risks of your device. Individual risks means because your device may have multiple hazards, it may create different types of risks for all of them. Estimate and evaluate them. Then control the risks. These are the things we do to reduce and maintain the risk at acceptable levels. When you do risk controls to control the risks, then you have to verify those risk controls that they actually work. Because you can put in some feature that you may claim that it's going to reduce risk, but it may not. So you have to actually demonstrate that. Another requirement is to ensure completeness of risk controls. What this means is that for all the identified hazards and hazardous situations, ensure that all of them, the risks are controlled. Now, the next part is evaluate overall residual risk. A medical device has individual risks, but then it also has an overall risk. If you put it all together, it has an overall risk. And the reason the standard asks for this is because a patient is facing the entire device, not just one hazard. It's the whole device. So they want to know what is the overall residual risk of this device. And interestingly, you also have to show in your plan, how are you going to determine and evaluate this overall residual risk? In other words, you have a bunch of individual risks. How are you going to put them together? Then you have to show that the benefits of your device outweigh the risks. Seems reasonable, right? And you need to do a formal risk management review. This is a review process that you can do once or multiple times during the course of your product development to show certain things, that you have followed your plan, that your risks are acceptable, that you have a post-market surveillance plan. And then you write a report. And this is the thing that you deliver to the regulators to say, please approve my device. Here's proof that I've done what you asked me to do according to the framework of ISO 14971. So at this point, if they approve it, now we release the product is in the field. Now what? Now we are supposed to monitor the product and see how it's doing. In production and post-production phases, up until this point, we've been doing predictive engineering, predicting what's going to happen in the future. But as you know, like all forecasters, predictions are not always perfect. So sometimes we make mistakes, we miss things. That's why it's important to have this production and post-production risk management to monitor how the product is actually performing. Are the risk controls as effective as we thought? Is the customer experience what we thought? Are customers making errors that we didn't think about? And then there's this assembly of all the work products that we have done. They go into a place called risk management file. It's just a repository. And traceability. We need to show that all these elements are connected together and they're traced. So if your device has a failure, and that could lead into a hazard, and that could lead to a hazardous situation, and that could lead to a harm, and that creates a risk, and then you control that risk with some tests. You see, all these things have to be connected together. That's called traceability. That's another requirement. And they also expect you to use competent personnel. So this is the framework for ISO 14970. This is one of the things that ISO 14971 asks you to have is to have a risk management system. So there's a process and a system. Risk management system is comprised of these 5 pieces. You have a risk management plan, risk management process, and the risk management file. And these operate on the foundation of competency of your personnel. And they also bestow responsibilities on top management. They recognize that top management has a strong influence on the safety of the product. As you can imagine, by the resources they make available, the timelines that they give you, the complexity that they expect, so they can affect safety of your product. So let's zoom in on the risk management process. And by the way, if you see these pictures in the corner, upper right corner of the slide, that says that if you wanted to read more about this subject, is chapter 7, section 1 of my book, second edition. It's about this subject. This is figure 1 of ISO 14971. It lays out the risk management process as envisioned by the standard. There are major components to it. Now I'm going to use my laser pointer so that people online can also see. So there's this major block at the top, risk analysis. Then there's risk evaluation. Here's risk controls. As you can see, there's a number of sub-elements of each of these major blocks. Then this is the evaluation of overall residual risk, risk management review, and this is the point of submission here. Then at this point, we now go to post-market for production and post-production activities. The combination of risk analysis and risk evaluation is called risk assessment. And then the risk management plan is on the left side here. It governs the entire process. Let's zoom in on risk analysis. Start your risk analysis with a clear description of your medical device. Define the scope, what's included and what's not included. Some medical devices are complex and they have many parts. For example, a surgical robot may have a robot arm, they may have a console, they may have implements. So you may just say, well, we're going to focus on just the robot. So that's the definition of the scope for that part. It's important to be clear. So clarity is vital in how your device works and identify it by its specific versions. Next, identify the intended use and reasonably foreseeable misuse. Intended use talks about what disease or condition your device is intended for, what parts of the body, in what environment, what type of patient population, what kind of user, what are the operating principles of your device. That's your intended use. And then there is the reasonably foreseeable misuse. Reasonably foreseeable misuse talks about the things that you did not intend to be done with your device, but you can anticipate people could do that. If you have had experience with clinicians, they're very creative and they do things with your device that you didn't intend to. Sometimes you haven't even imagined. This is what makes predictive engineering hard because they do crazy things with our devices. Has anybody run into an experience of a reasonably foreseeable misuse that they hadn't anticipated and then they saw it happen?
All the time.
All the time. Care to share an example?
I'm not sure. There an example.
Okay, if you can't, that's okay.
Yeah,
You've seen it. Yeah.
It's surgeons, so they're very creative. If they want to do something, they'll find a way.
Yeah. You know, I thought about maybe is there a product that was intended by the manufacturer to be used in one way and people misused it so much that they just removed the product altogether. And I came up with one example, but it's not a medical example. And do you guys know what lawn darts are? You know, these darts that people would toss up, it was supposed to be landing in a target on the lawn. Well, kids started to throwing it at each other instead of on the lawns. And there was a lot of injuries. Even though it was not intended for being thrown at each other, eventually the product was removed from the market because people were just misusing it too much.
In the NHS where I used to see quite a lot where a clinician would go to a conference and they would end up buying a product which is more a research equipment, not necessarily complied with those relevant.
Even unapproved.
Yeah, and then they'd start using it on patients, and we realized that, and we would have to intervene and say, well, it's not designed for the purpose. It's just the research equipment, and you are using it either to diagnose or treat.
Yeah.
And there were loads of such occurrences I used to find in my previous employment.
So based on this kind of knowledge, you're supposed to actually not only predict what people could do with your device, but it has to be included in your risk management file. You have to actually analyze this. So the next thing is about identification of characteristics related to safety. Each medical device has some characteristics that could give rise to hazards, and these could be either qualitative or quantitative or both. Maybe if you are talking about an electrosurgical device and you can adjust the amount of current that it puts out, you can say that if you go to level X, it's okay, but if you go past that, it's not okay. So this is a limit about characteristic of a device that after which it becomes unsafe. There are 37 questions in Annex A of ISO TR 24971 that help you, guide you to think about your device, to identify its characteristics that could give rise to hazards. So that's a good, handy help. The next part is about identification of hazards and hazardous situations. Beyond the characterizations, we also need to identify what hazards the device is capable of presenting. And besides that, the characterization, you can also refer to databases such as MOD database in the FDA. And there's going to be a UDAMED, I think, supposed to be released next year. That will also have information. There are field safety notices. There's public information that you can refer to. And if you have been making a product for a long time, you have your own historical data, your complaint handling data, so you can discover hazards that are relevant to your device. And then for each hazard, there will be a sequence of events that leads to a hazardous situation. A hazardous situation, of course, is when somebody is exposed to a hazard. People can use different techniques for this identification of these sequences, such as fault tree analysis. Also for identification of hazards, they can use failure modes and effects analysis. None of these are the complete answer, but there are give you parts of the answer. Any hazards you guys have run into in your medical devices? Examples? No, just look. Because of proprietariness, maybe don't answer that question. Give me some examples of this. But what do you think would be a hazard? Exactly. Sharp edges is one, yeah. Exactly. Biological agents, yeah.
Electricity.
Yep. High current, electricity. Yeah. That's right. Very good. These are the things that if you're exposed to, they can harm you.
Moving parts.
Moving parts, exactly. Right. Yeah. And if you could get your finger pinched somewhere. Yeah. Ionizing radiation is another one. And the next part is about risk estimation. Now, after we have identified each of these hazardous situations, we have to identify the probability that they can lead into harm. Risk is a metric by which we decide whether and how much to reduce the risk of a hazard. Risk estimation has been a challenge for some companies. But let's look at ISO 14971 and see how it defines risk. ISO 14971 has this picture in one of its annexes. It says that from a hazard, you can go through a sequence of events and you can arrive at a hazardous situation, and they call that P1. And from a hazardous situation, you can go through some additional events and you can receive harm. And the probability of receiving harm from a hazardous situation is called P2. And then they say risk is just P1 times P2. Pretty easy. And some people call it probability of harm, P sub H. But this is just a product of the probability of creating a hazardous situation and then the probability of receiving harm from that hazardous situation. So what is P2 and where do you get it? P2 is a clinical question, and it's independent of P1. Because it's independent of P1, it becomes reusable. So you can ask the question, if a person is exposed to a pathogen, a biological pathogen, let's say coronavirus, what are the chances that this person is going to get lung damage? A clinician can help you with that answer. And that's reusable because it doesn't matter whether the person got exposure from another person or a device or whatever. Still the same infection. So what about P1? Where do you get that? P1, it depends. If it is a result of a failure in your medical device, you can perhaps get that from your reliability group. You can give you a probability of failure of your medical device. Or if if your device or similar device like that, maybe previous generation, has been in the market for a while, you can have historical data based on market data that you have collected. So now this creates an interesting issue regarding software. A lot of medical devices have software. And if you want to come up with a P1 for software, that's it, then we have a problem with that. Because IEC 62304, section B 4.3, says there is no consensus on how to estimate the probability of software failure. And then says to be conservative, set that equal to 100%. Well, we know software doesn't fail 100% of the time, but if you remove P1, then you don't have this equation of P1 times P2. You're missing part of it. So how are we going to estimate risks from software? There is one out that we have, and that is the standard says if you have a legacy software that has been around for a while and you have collected information, you can use historical data on that legacy software to get probability of failure of that software. So I'm going to show you a little model here. Let's say, well, first this map here shows you how a hazard, hypothetical hazard, can arise. It says there's an initiating event that leads to a cascade of events, and eventually it creates a hazard. Let's say that one of these events was a software failure. And we are supposed to set that equal to 100%. All right, so we'll do that. Remember that the probability of creation of the hazard itself is comprised of an equation of probability of the initiating event happening, and then event 2 happening, and then probability of software failure happening, and so on until we get to the last event. And if we multiply all these things, then we get the probability of creation of hazard. So what this says is that if I set this term to 100%, okay, I can do that. It's conservative, but then I have other numbers that are not 100%. So my P1 doesn't have to be 100%. And the next thing to consider is that hazardous situation means you have to have the hazard first, and then you have to be exposed to it, and then you have a hazardous situation. So P1 is probability of the hazard times the probability of exposure to that hazard. But probability of exposure sometimes is not 100%. So now I have two numbers that are less than 100%. And then I can say my risk, I can calculate my risk, even though I have set my probability of software failure to 100%. It's something reasonable. So going back to this map, next let's talk about risk controls. Risk controls are overt actions and measures by which we reduce risks or keep them at acceptable levels. ISO 14971 foresees 3 kinds of risk controls. One, make your product inherently safe by design and manufacture. It's just safe as it is. Or you can put some protective measures either in the design of the device or in the manufacturing process to make it safe. Or you can provide information for safety and, where appropriate, training to users. So let's look at an example. Here's a railroad crossing. As you can see, cars and trains can be in the same space and they could have collisions. So this is our system, we want to make it safe. One of the things that we could do is separate the roadway from the railway. So it becomes impossible for the trains and cars to be in the same space. What kind do you think this is? Safe by design, right? Or you can put these barriers with bells and lights to prevent cars from driving over the railway when there's a train coming. This would be a protective measure, right? Or you can just put a stop sign there and put a sign there that there's a railroad crossing. So this is information for safety. One of the things that we have to do is to do risk control option analysis. This is one of the requirements of ISO 14971. That means analyze these three options. But to be able to do that, you need to understand and be able to distinguish them. I don't know if you have run into situations where it was hard to tell whether a risk control was a safe by design, or was it a protective measure, or was it information for safety. It's not always very clear. So I'll give you some tips on how to distinguish them to tell whether something is inherently safe by design and manufacture. That risk control means the device will behave in a safe manner without any action or knowledge required from the user. So in the case of a train example, we saw that there's nothing the cars need to do or know. They just drive as usual. In the case of a medical device, let's say you're making an implantable medical device. If you use a biocompatible material for that device, well, then it's just safe by itself. There is nothing that the patient or the user need to do or know. Or if you have removed the sharp edges from your device, well, they can't go add sharp edges, and the device is already safe. Protective measures, the distinction is that they also make the device behave in a safe manner without the need of the user intervention, but this protection can be easily defeated by the user. So imagine a hypodermic needle. It has a plastic cap to protect the patients and users from getting stuck by the sharp end of the needle, but they can just pull the cap off. Or in the example of the railway system I just showed you, have you seen cars drive around the barriers? They defeat that. So, I mean, it's possible, it's not too hard. And in the distinction for the information for safety is you are providing knowledge to the user and you're expecting action from them. So that in the example of the railway, we had a sign that it showed railroad crossing. That's information. And then there was a stop sign. That's action. Yeah, you're expecting them to take some action. Of course, they can ignore you, but that's what information for safety is. A medical example of it is reusable surgical tools. A lot of surgical tools can be cleaned and re-sterilized. If you explain to your user how to clean, how to sterilize, then you're providing information for safety to them, how to be using this product in a safe manner. So these tips should help you, and you can read about them in chapter 18 too. Can help you tell which is which. And so if you're challenged, have you done risk control option analysis? You can say, yes, I have done it. This one is safe by design, this one is protective measure, and this one is information for safety. Training is obvious. So some tips about crafting risk controls. Make sure your risk control is understandable. These are the 4 tips that I'm giving. Achievable, verifiable, and hierarchical. So I'll explain what each of those means. Understandable means that a regulator or a reviewer that reads your risk control should be able to understand what it is you're trying to do. So an example that comes to mind is about, since I used to work in defibrillators, an implantable defibrillator sometimes gives inappropriate shocks to patients. A risk control could be crafted in this way that we will increase the specificity of the algorithm that detects VF. And that means that in a more understandable English language says that we are trying to make the device deliver fewer shocks. But you could also write an algorithm with a lot of statistics and boundaries and details that a reviewer may not understand what you're trying to achieve, because they see the technicalities of it, but they don't know what the point of it is. So if you write it in a way that is understandable, that's a better way. Another one is that it should be achievable, both technologically and legally. You may wonder why legally? And I've run into this. One of my clients, they were building a device that they had envisioned putting a risk control, but that risk control had an IP by their competitors. So legally, they were not allowed to use that risk control. It was not achievable. Sometimes it's technologically not achievable. Let's say if you want to have your lithium battery device, like pain management system, they use a lot of batteries, so they need to be recharged. And it takes a while. The patient has to put the recharger over their body and wait for it to recharge, and it takes hours. Well, let's say you like to make this recharge in 5 minutes. Okay, good for you, but it's just not technologically achievable today. And next one is verifiable. When you write a risk control, you need to be able to verify it. So for any of you who are systems engineers, you can probably relate this well to this, because like system requirements that you write, you need to be verifiable. If you write that I'm going to improve something, like improve accuracy or improve strength or something, that is not verifiable, because you don't know what improve means. How much improvement? It's not measurable, right? You just think, make it better. Okay, nice. How do I verify this? So as you craft your risk controls, think about these things. And then lastly, hierarchical. And hierarchical is just saying by going the order that the standard tells you, but safe by design first, protective measures second, information for safety third. Next topic I'll talk about is risk-based decision-making. A robust risk management system doesn't just make safer products for your patients, but it also aids your management in making sound, defensible decisions. Now, both EU MDR and ISO 13485 emphasize risk-based approach. You may have seen that mentioned many, many times. Well, if you're going to make a risk-based approach, you need to know what risk is. So that's one of the benefits of risk management. You can support your management in making good decisions. So one of the things that your management and yourself can do is based on risk is you can prioritize your decisions. Sometimes seemingly minor choice could have significant consequences and repercussions. I don't know if many of you are aware or familiar with the case of the CPAP and BiPAP machines that Philips makes by ventilating. A seemingly minor thing, a decomposition of a sound noise suppression element, caused enormous damage to the company in terms of recall, financial loss, loss of jobs. They even had to replace their CEO. So it could be very severe. Next topic I'll talk about is the risk management file. As you can imagine, risk management for a medical device, especially a complex one, can lead to a highly intricate and interconnected risk management file. So I drew a picture to give you an idea of what it could look like. These are some of the elements that you could have in your risk management file, and they all are connected. This complexity arises from a high degree of coupling between these various elements of your risk management file. If you make a change in one of these pieces, it ripples through the whole network and affects them. So the challenge is to maintain the integrity and correctness of this network. Attempts to manually maintain the integrity of this is very difficult and very likely would lead to errors that could be found in an audit. I don't know if anybody has tried to do this, especially for even moderately complex device. It is incredibly difficult to do this. So what do we do? What do we do? How do we tame this software tools? There are software tools available that help you handle these complexities by creating this integrity, the connection, these various parts, so that if you make changes to one part, that change automatically is rippled through and is populated in other areas. Or if you make a change, for example, to your traceability, if you change one side of this link, it tells you that now you have to go read this link and make sure that it's still valid, because now the starting point may not match the ending point of that link anymore. And next topic I'll talk about is about culture. It's about the importance of creating and nurturing safety culture within an organization. So what is culture? Culture is the lifeblood of a company. It is how we see ourselves, how we hold our values, the ways we communicate, and the ways we tell our stories, how we see ourselves in a medical device company or medtech industry. It influences implicitly all of our decisions. So it influences safety. ISO 14971 recognizes top management plays an important role in creating a safety culture. Cultures are set by the top echelons of a company. You can imagine if you have a highly conservative top management, the whole company becomes highly conservative, and vice versa. The top management could make it known that patient safety is important. It can imbue that value into the whole company and affect the way that everybody thinks and works. So what does it look like? What does a safety culture look like? Some features, some traits that you can find. One of them is that the top management has made it known that patient and user safety is paramount to the business of the company. There is a cross-functional collaboration that people in different functional areas work with each other with the intention of keeping the product safe. And then there's a sense of safety in people that they will not be punished for identifying safety risks. Sounds kind of strange, huh? But imagine if you find a safety risk in a product that is, you find it toward the end of the product development process. Obviously, it's going to create delays. Then delays are bad for business. And you may imagine also that the business leaders would be not happy about that. And they may press you to reconsider or maybe even punish you. So a company with a safety culture is one where people feel safe about identifying and telling people about the safety risks that they have found. People have no doubt that patient or user safety is first, and everyone wants to do their part to mitigate safety risks. And then there is a trust and confidence in the risk management process itself. People believe that this SOP that they're working on is not just a paper exercise. It's not just a waste of time checking the box. They actually think this is really doing something. And lastly, people operate based on knowledge of risk, not fear and panic. So I have 12 minutes left in my time slot. I think at this point, I will open it for questions. Online too, if you have questions, yeah.
So you mentioned software tools can help with traceability between dealing with all the governments and trying to interact. Have you ever actually encountered a good software tool for that? I've had plenty of awful ones. Ones that will cope with.
Yeah. Yeah. The question is, I'm going to repeat the question for people online. Have I encountered a good software tool to help you with managing your risk management file and traceability? Yes, but because I work with multiple companies, I am afraid I can't endorse one or the other. But there are a number out there. I've used a few myself. Some are better than others. So yeah,
Maybe. I think I don't know whether you've used JAMA is one of the ones that I have come across and is a more user friendlier than some of the others. Having said that, I've used all of them. There's some other system engineering tools that support as well, but I think for the risk management requirements and that I've understood that the JAMA has been the best for me that I've come across.
It's the least bad option.
okay, thank you for sharing that. Yes, another question here.
To bounce off of that, and actually ask, in your opinion, what makes a good software tool with this? A good software tool? Like, what do you think are the features that should be present if someone's creating a new system?
Yeah, so the question is that what would be the characteristics of a good software tool? So you can write system requirements for this. And there are a number of things, and it kind of depends on your company, but you want it to be able to manage the documents and how they are connected to each other, be able to manage the requirements, be able to trace everything such as failures in an FMEA to hazards, to hazardous situations, to sequences of events, to harms, to test cases. Another cool feature that I've seen in one of the tools that I've seen is it also can manage compliance. So you can put in, for example, ISO 14971 or 13485 clause by clause, and it can help you trace where in your file you have fulfilled any one of these clauses. So you can actually easily show that, yes, I am. If you submit a certificate of conformity, then you can say, I can say it with confidence because here's my proof. So yeah, I think there's a number of things that I'm not giving you a comprehensive answer, but you can just think about the things that you need yourself. One of the things I would want in it is for it to be able to produce nice reports, nicely formatted reports. Another thing a cool thing that I think is really handy is to have a single source of truth. So some things, like your intended use, they should be only in one place and referenced by others. You can't have the intended use written in your, for example, marketing literature to be one thing and your risk management file to be something else. They have to be aligned. Yeah. Another one is about disclosure of residual risks. This is one of the requirements of ISO 14971 and EU MDR. Well, what if you had a risk disclosed in your literature, but it wasn't showing up in your risk management file? Isn't that embarrassing? So you should be able to identify these things and make the connections for you. A good tool is amazing in value. I mean, I can't overemphasize how important it is to use it. Yes, sir, in the back.
So maybe another question or a comment to the previous question. I have worked with different tools and I haven't found one. It usually is multiple tools because it's not just risk management, so it's requirement management,
Yeah.
it's file, it's also the DFD software will have their own architecture somewhere. And I think the most difficult part is defining the architecture of all the tools and how they are flagged. And one of the super important things for me in my experience is that there's always traceability forward, backwards, sideways, historical traceability. Because if we only trace forward, it may not be simple as identify the risk control measure. And then we say this needs to be now in this requirement, and we open the requirement and it never traces back to the risk control measure. So we don't even know that's a safety requirement.
Yeah.
So maybe there's no one tool, but if we configure them with risk management in mind, then we can have this visibility and more visibility across different tools.
So I'm going to try to summarize what you said for people online. You said these tools have multiple aspects. For example, requirements management, test management, safety risk management, and that's true. The ones that I've seen they have all these various aspects, even human factors. And also he talked about traceability, that it can be in, forward and backward, well, no sideways, but forward and backward. And that's true. So you can have a requirement that connects traces to a design output that is a risk control. But sometimes maybe you have a risk control that has no requirement. So if you don't do backward traceability, you can't find out that there is no requirement that defines that. Another thing that I like, and this is not hard, most of the tools that I've seen do this, is to have the ability to tag requirements as safety requirements. That's pretty easy to do. So that if an auditor says, what are your safety requirements? Click, here it is. That easy.
Maybe one
Yeah.
thing to add is, I think in medtech and pharma, I see that we have, and it's not generally speaking for everybody, but generally I find that the system engineering is not necessarily used that widely. And I think where there's some of the tools have overlapping aspects to risk management and requirements and all of that. And I think having those integration inputs, outputs across the product development lifecycle stages, I think the using those system engineering concepts and MBSE tools, model-based system engineering tools, usually support not just on one program, but when you start using for multiple programs, you can leverage 30-40% of already developed documentation to requirements to test methods to all that across another product. And I think that's something that I've used, I find is quite useful, but it's something that is not so widely used currently. And it's a new thing that I try to encourage our clients to start using, investing in those tools.
Yeah. As I mentioned, I'm a systems engineer myself. So I'm a high proponent of people, systems engineers, being involved in risk management, and the tools and techniques of systems engineering are very beneficial to risk management. So, like I was talking about verifiability. Yeah.
One question, Rachel Ryan.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Question.
Just one. ISO 62304 recommends P1 equals 100% of software failure. This is for P1 before controls are implemented. We have the ability to lower P1 after controls are implemented. Is this correct?
Yes. I hope everybody heard that. That we can put in risk controls in software. So after we say we set it at 100%, then we can reduce it. Even the standard itself says it is clear that if you put in these risk controls, you reduce the risk, you reduce the probability of failure, except for we don't know what the final number is yet. Yeah, also, we don't know what the starting point was. We don't know what the end point is. We know the end point is lower than the start point, but that's all that we can say.
Is that partly to do with when you're doing your safety classification for your software, though? You need to assume P1 is 1 when you're doing your safety classification.
No, safety classification is about the kind of harm that the software failure can do. So that's not about the probability of it.
Yes, so you've got to assume the software failure is going to occur. So P1 is 1 when you're doing your safety classification.
We don't even ask about probability. We just say, can a software failure create a serious injury to a patient?
Because I think in the diagram in 62304, it's got P1 equals 1, which is where the confusion comes from, and why a lot of people are doing software P1 equals 1.
Yeah, software P1 is not equal to 1. It's the probability of software failure, as you saw in that map that I showed you.
62304 uses the term P1, which is where a lot of confusion comes from.
Unfortunately, the standards are not perfect. Even EU MDR is not perfect. They're written by humans, and there's lots of inconsistencies and errors even. So I brought this up to the ISO 14971 committee, and they said, well, you guys, medical device companies, you make products, and then you keep improving it, right? Generation after generation. So we make standards, we also improve it over time. So I don't expect perfection.
Can you elaborate a little bit on your experience on criteria for acceptability overall residual risk? What is your experience, if you have some thing to share about that in this
question round? Do I have experience, or can I talk about my own experience on
Yes,
acceptability,
yes,
residual risk?
yes,
Yeah.
yes. Criteria for acceptability.
Yeah.
Oh.
So the question is, how do you define the criteria for acceptability of the overall residual risk? The standard says you can have the same criteria for individual risks and overall risks, or you can have different criteria. In my experience, people use the same criteria. And so, of course, it depends if you use quantitative, semi-quantitative, or qualitative techniques for risk acceptability. So yeah, in my experience, we use the same for individual and overall.
And I think we've got a half an hour for the panel discussion. Like if
Yeah.
there's a topic on the software risk
Yeah.
management or any of that, maybe we could
Yeah.
discuss further.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess that was my Q&A slide. Just before I finish, I just want to say that, I touched on certain topics and just wanted to show you the list of the courses that are available on risk management. There's 9 courses that I teach. And the last one, the 3-day one, is the one equivalent to the one I teach in graduate schools for doctoral students. But the other ones are just bits and pieces of it. You get the slide decks and you can look at it. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to me. So this takes me to the cybersecurity section. Well, we don't have a break in between the talks, but we'll have a break afterwards, right?
Yeah, just in case if people would like to refill their coffee. So maybe we could start in a couple of minutes.
Okay, maybe take like 5 minutes.
Yeah, let's take a 5 minutes
Let's
break.
take 5 minutes. You can pause. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So hello everyone. I'm Andy Britton from PA Consulting. I'm going to talk to you about cybersecurity and medical devices and risk management associated with cybersecurity. So I'm not a rock star, unlike Bijan, and I haven't written a book, but hopefully I'll give you a good flavour as to the sorts of things you need to look at. And I think, having listened to Bijan's excellent talk, I'll kind of compare and contrast as we go as well, because actually a lot of the principles for cyber and safety are actually the same, but there are probably a few key differences that we need to draw out, bring your attention to as we go. And also you can drill into that in the Q&A session as well. So, and I focused on the Internet of Medical Things because I think that brings out connectivity, basically. So we're moving from an age of disconnected devices to very much more and more connectivity. And with that connectivity, that's why cyber has become such a focus, because of course it allows cyber attackers to get in and compromise data, devices, and so on and so forth. So that's why there's been this shift over time.
Wait a second. Try again.
Wow, there we go. Technology failure. And a cyber attack on the laser points of that. So just to sort of bring this to life a little bit, but also perhaps to worry you slightly, you can see that 53% of connected medical devices and other IoT devices in hospitals have some form of critical vulnerability. So that's obviously quite a concerning statistic. And if we home in on IV pumps, which make up 38% maybe of a typical hospital footprint, 73% of those have some sort of cyber vulnerability. So you can see it's an ongoing and continual challenge, basically, to keep up to date and protect medical devices. But it's also quite a worry as well for devices that are out there in the field, and they need to keep those up to date. So, and I'm sure we'll all remember CrowdStrike. So whilst it wasn't in the medical device field, you can see the impact that some form of it wasn't a cyber attack, it was a software update, but you can see the global impact that some form of incident like that can have, with all sorts of ripple effects, around the globe. And that brings sort of cyber into sharp focus, really, in terms of what we need to do. to protect all of us, protect patients, protect ourselves, protect patient data as well. So a lot of what we're seeing, as I said, with connectivity was driven by Internet of Things more generally, and that's where I started. So I don't really touch on my background. I started as a hardware designer many years ago, over 30 years ago. So doing embedded systems in telecoms. I still dabble with embedded systems when I get some time. So I still write code. I still design bits of hardware. From there, I moved into sort of software and coding more formally, then into project management. And obviously, there's quite a lot of risk management and project management. So I cut my teeth in terms of risk management from a project perspective. Spent about 20 years delivering sort of global projects in the telecoms arena for all sorts of different things. Then I moved into Internet of Things, so connected devices more generally, from smart meters through to medical devices. And then historically, then I've focused on cybersecurity and protecting those connected devices for about the past 5 years. And I've probably spent a good 3 or 4 years of that looking at medical devices specifically. But I think if we look at the broader trend, you know, around Internet of Things, that has then flowed down into connected medical devices as well. So you're seeing significant investments around healthcare and connecting medical devices, because that obviously yields a whole lot of benefits in terms of patient care and delivery of healthcare as well, taking it out of the hospital environment into a home environment. So there's lots of real benefits to this, as well as the risks. So again, the balance between risk and benefit and cost. So we can deliver all sorts of interesting services in the home, accelerated by the pandemic in many respects. There's a big focus on moving things out of the clinical environment. So that's only accelerated this connectivity of devices. So I won't bore you with the numbers and the growth of IoT, because they're always wrong. So Gartner, I think if you look at their original statistics around IoT, are probably way out, but it's still grown at a very significant rate over the past 10, 15 years. So I've kind of touched on this. So in terms of there's lots of not quite competing developments, but different streams of development going on, because you've got startups, you know, developing devices. You've got organizations doing things on mobile phones, and they don't necessarily realize that it's actually software as a medical device. They're launching it, making claims about it. You've got organizations perhaps like those in the room who come from a more traditional background and are very well aware of medical device development and security. And then you've got crowdsourced and open source initiatives, some of which are driven by sort of frustrations from people around, well, why can't we do this? And I can do this with a Raspberry Pi. You know, from a security perspective, you know, that makes me want to sit down and sort of, I have to get the defibrillator out because it's quite scary, you know. But I understand why people are doing that, because you've got two devices that are connected. It's like, why can't I get them to talk to each other? If I've got something that delivers insulin, I've got something that's monitoring my blood sugar, why can't the two talk together? So there's something around, you know, interoperability, but in a secure manner as well. So you can see all these competing forces coming together. And if we look at what underpins all of that, you know, it's platforms, it's data, it's artificial intelligence, it's machine learning. So all of that connectivity comes together, things go into the cloud, lots of data goes into the cloud. Again, fantastic in terms of what you can do, improving healthcare. But from a cyber perspective, everything that is in a single place potentially, with all the vulnerabilities that come along with that. So perhaps I can go in and attack every device in your fleet as a cyber attacker by going in through the cloud, because that's a single point of compromise. So again, it's a question of thinking these things through from that perspective. And also, I'll touch on AI later in terms of, obviously, it's like all technologies, there's good aspects to it, and there's also the adversarial aspect to AI as well, which from a cyber perspective, we do need to think about. So in terms of security incidents, I think they're only going to grow. Unfortunately, it's just the nature of things. So it is a bit of a race between us in the cyber profession, actually protecting systems, and the cyber attackers and cyber criminals who are looking to compromise them and generally make money or just disrupt things for the hell of it. We see quite a lot of that going on. And you can see a number of incidents here that I've called out, from insulin pumps to sort of imaging systems, defibrillators, and so on and so forth. And perhaps the other thing to call out here in terms of attacks on like hospitals and so on is that teases out a key aspect in terms of what cyber criminals are looking to do, which is you've got patient data. So it's very sensitive data, and they see the ability to be able to monetize that. So that's something I'll touch on a bit later on. So you've got very valuable data there. If someone gets their hands on it, they can hold you to ransom, they can lock the systems down. We've seen that on a number of occasions, including in the NHS. But that's a particular thing that cyber attackers tend to go after. And it makes medical devices and medtech in general a key target for them in terms of what they're looking to do, unfortunately. So, and I think obviously we had a great view from Bijan around safety risk management. And I think the thing with safety risk management, like safety in general, is it's across other industries, it is very well established. So, you know, the tools and techniques and processes and methodologies have been in place for a number of years, and they're pretty robust and well understood. When it comes to cyber, particularly in this area, it's still emerging, and it's a lot better than when I started in terms of the evolution of the standards and the guidance, but it's still comparatively immature, and there isn't sort of a coalescing around a particular standard. You've got 14971 for risk management, but in terms of cyber itself, there's a number of standards around there, one of which might win. UL 2900 possibly might be a winner in that space. If you look at the FDA guidance and you look at UL 2900, they're very similar. In fact, it's like they've kind of based it on UL 2900. So I think there's probably a drive in that way, but you can't really lock yourself down or pick a standard and think that's going to work necessarily. So you can see that over perhaps the next 5 years, it might coalesce around a particular standard for cybersecurity. And that'll make everyone's lives easier in this particular domain, because you've got, an industry accepted standard that everyone uses, which will make life simpler. I mean, that may or may not be possible. I don't know. Cyber is constantly developing. So, and I think some of the things I've called out here are, from a cyber perspective, the sorts of things that you will be asked to do and think about and look at might be outside of your traditional expertise or comfort zone in terms of development. Again, it depends on your particular organization. So, you could be talking about hardware security modules, secure elements on embedded devices. So things that are quite complex to manage and look after, that might not be something you're traditionally used to managing. We've got cloud security and authentication. So in a cloud environment, we regularly see compromises with cloud environments because they're poorly configured. So S3 buckets in Amazon is a good example where people quite often accidentally just leave data there. Cyber attacker comes in and hoovers it all up. That is a very common scenario that occurs just through to poor processes and poor configuration. So it's very easy to slip up, unfortunately, with these things. I couldn't not mention privacy with Sharad in the room, who leads our privacy area. So there's quite a strong linkage between privacy and security, obviously, as you might expect. Privacy, you've got a whole load of regulation to comply with some nasty, significant regulatory penalties and fines if you breach that and leak patient data. And from a security perspective, obviously, we're trying to mitigate the risks around loss of data if the data is lost, and making sure it's encrypted and so on and so forth. So there's quite an interplay between the two disciplines. So it's worth bearing that in mind when you're looking at security as well. But less about patient harm directly. But I think if my data is compromised, I view that as a form of harm to me from that perspective. even if it's not sort of clinical damage. And I think another interesting point that Bijan raised was around sort of the whole life cycle, sort of birth to death. And that's very important from a cyber perspective as well. So all the way through from cyber requirements through to disposal of the device. So if you dispose of a device, it could have sensitive data on it. It could have encryption keys on it. So thinking about the full life cycle, keeping the device up to date in the field, a sort of critical consideration. So that whole life cycle view is very important from a cyber perspective as well. So it's really good to see Bijan calling that out. So before I dive into this slide, I've got some props which I think support this. So I haven't killed too many trees in doing this, but I thought it was worthwhile. So this was the FDA pre-market guidance for cyber, 2014. So you can see it's quite thin. 8 pages. 8 pages. Then we moved to 2018, and this stayed in draft for a number of years. This particular guidance, I don't think it ever was actually moved beyond draft, because the FDA were probably struggling to keep up with all the developments in cyber and wondering what to do. 23 pages. And then we've got the latest from 2023, which is now over 50 pages long. And there's an awful lot in here for you to do in terms of activities, documentation, and diligence that you need to provide, for example, to the FDA, to the regulators, to demonstrate you've secured the device and you've done it in a very robust way. So from what they're expecting previously around pre-market to what they're expecting now, there's a much more significant amount of material. And then, of course, further to that, a number of these things have actually been put into statute effectively with the Omnibus Appropriations Bill. So this means that the things that you have to do from a US perspective to protect the device. And that's probably quite a big shift. And it's a shift we've seen in other sectors as well, where things move into regulation. And that obviously drives a whole variety of different behaviors. It means that you have to do things. So we've seen that, as I say, in other sectors in terms of that kind of drive, regulatory drive. It might be in rail or transport as well, where that regulation has kicked in, or energy and utilities. So the key things that have come into law with the Omnibus Appropriations Act are coordinated vulnerability disclosure. So this is making sure that if a device in the field is found to have a vulnerability, that you have a means of letting customers know about it so they can take action to make sure that those vulnerabilities can be addressed. Linked to that is then being able to update the device in the field as well rapidly. So you've got to think about meeting those sorts of requirements. Making sure, as I say, those updates are available for critical vulnerabilities. And I think the other thing, which was a big shift, which I'm very supportive of, is software bill of materials. So I don't know if anyone's come across SBOM. So a lot of these devices, as I'm sure you know, because you've already built some of them, have an awfully big inventory of software associated with them. The one that Mayor and I worked on had over 5,000 software components. So if you lose track of those components and one of them has a vulnerability, you don't know you've got a device out there with some sort of vulnerability. So, an attacker could exploit that vulnerability. So that's why the SBOM is really important to track. So you would then know, right, this component has a vulnerability. Some of you may have heard of Log4j, for example, or SolarWinds. Depends if you're plugged into the cyber domain, but these were things that were found. And then clients had a great deal of trouble unpicking, do I use Log4j anywhere? And quite often the answer was no, we don't use it, no. And then they dig a bit deeper and they find in their supply chain, another vendor was using it. So they have some software that was then using that component. So that's why software bill of materials is really critical. And of course, that's only going to get, I'd say, worse, but more complex. You know, as the devices become more complex, as AI comes in, the software bill of materials, the amount of stuff that goes into these devices will become more and more. There's other things that the FDA sort of want you to do as well that we can come on to, which again are good practice from a cyber security perspective, but they've really honed in on sort of threat and risk analysis, particularly on the threat side, and also lots of diligent documentation around that, looking at data flows and how you protect the data flows between the device and the cloud, or the device and the phone, if you've got that sort of device.
Quick question that came up online is there a good or recognized standard or template for the software bill of materials?
So there's about 3 different competing versions for SBOM. They all do very similar things, so it's a matter of within your organization picking a particular one. But yeah, there are recognized systems that will produce an SBOM. Quite often it's linked to your DevSecOps, so you can get your tooling to actually produce the SBOM for you in a particular format. So you know, it's not the sort of thing you'd want to do manually.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
So we've kind of touched on this in terms of the threat landscape for medical devices. So it's complex and evolving. And some key threats to consider. I mean, again, if you just look at if you read the press, if you see what's going on, ransomware and data breaches are a key one in this particular space because of the sensitive data that quite often is held. So that, as I say, is a key target. And ransomware and data breaches tend to be linked in the sense that an attacker will lock the system down with ransomware, and then they'll threaten to release the data, knowing that you'll then have to pay a regulatory fine. So it's like you either pay a ransom or they release the data and you pay a regulatory fine. So they I wouldn't say they've got you over a barrel, but certainly all the guidance in the UK is not to pay ransoms at all, because it just encourages this kind of behaviour. And obviously you really want to get to the point where you're not being held to ransom, which is where cyber comes in. And again, big link to data privacy there in terms of protecting the data. Unauthorized access to systems and data. It's quite surprising how often as cyber professionals we see systems that have no passwords, no protection, so someone can just literally get into a system because something's, you know, I wouldn't say a backdoor, but a door's been left open, if you like, so someone is just able to log in or access data without authorization, without protection. That is very common. You've got denial of service, so this is someone flooding a system with lots of requests. Again, that tends to make availability go down or the system to keel over, so that's quite a common one. Data manipulation, so that's someone corrupting data, changing data. Again, that can be quite significant if if that particular piece of data is controlling what the medical device is doing or some sort of process. You can manipulate the data, and that may then have an impact on patient safety. So that's a key one to think about in terms of the analysis. And then intellectual property theft as well. So this is another good thing about sort of protecting your software and your systems, is that actually that can help protect your IP and your software. So if you've got secure software, it's much harder to defeat that and copy it and generate clones and so on. And part of the threat analysis is looking at threat actors in cyberspeak. So these are people like cyber criminals. So these are the people who try and cash in and make money out of doing nasty things. And some of them make millions of dollars or millions of pounds out of doing this. Sometimes they're linked to nation states as well, but they're quite hard to protect against. Then you've got sort of bedroom hackers or thrill seekers. So these are people who are just looking to disrupt things for the intellectual challenge, if you like. So quite often teenagers who can be quite adept at attacking things and doing things they shouldn't do. With teenagers who've got into, US Department of Defense, so they can be quite clever from that perspective. Then you've got hacktivists. So these are people who have a particular agenda. So that could be a green agenda. It could be an anti-big pharma kind of agenda as well. So they're just looking to disrupt you because they don't like the idea of big pharma or something similar. And then you've got insiders. So there's people either inside the organization or inside a hospital who might deliberately or accidentally do something. So use the same password across all sorts of different systems might be, an example of that.
Interesting enough, Andy, well, somebody said online, ex-employees.
Yes.
Have you heard that one before?
Yeah, ex-employees is an important one. So when someone leaves the organisation,
Who's they are looking at?
we've got an ex-employee here in the room, PA.
Two of them.
But yeah, when someone leaves, it's very important, that all their access is revoked, so that they can't access systems once they've left, and all the security clearances are revoked as well. And again, they might be hostile depending on how they've left the organisation. So they may have an axe to grind. So, and I think that the final point, which is being flagged by the National Cybersecurity Centre in the UK, is that threat actor capability is being enhanced by AI. So you've got teenagers in their bedrooms using AI to ask questions. And obviously, although AI systems have things in place to try and defeat that, people manage to get around it and ask, how might I do this? And AI might give them some ideas. So actually their capability is moving up a notch compared with what they had. So that's the sort of more adversarial part of AI from that perspective. So in terms of threat and risk analysis and frameworks to consider, so this is down to, again, it's not quite straightforward in terms of safety risk management, because you've got a bit of a choice as to what you do here. So for threat analysis, there's a good playbook that the FDA produced with MITRE. That's certainly worth looking at because it gives you a good view as to how to do threat modeling from a cyber perspective. So that talks about things like attack trees and so on, which is similar to fault trees in many respects. So it's how someone might go about compromising a system. You can also use a threat model called Stride. It's developed by Microsoft. So that looks at, again, different ways of compromising different parts of the system. So, spoofing and so on. One thing I have noticed a number of organizations do is they tend to sort of lock on to Stride or something similar, but that only really looks at technical risks. So you'll look at the architecture, you'll look at the data flows, and you use Stride, and you think, right, I've done my risk analysis now. All is good, but Stride misses a lot of supply chain risks, manufacturing risks, life cycle risks. So you actually have to do additional modeling over and above Stride because it's purely technical. So that's a key consideration. When it comes to risk analysis, scoring and control, perhaps I should say, although it's on another slide, but everything that Bijan said applies here. So all of the approach to cyber risk assessment, you can use 14971 to underpin it all. It's all based on that. There are a few little discrepancies in terms of the mechanics of it. So when it comes to risk analysis and scoring, again, there's a few different ways of doing this. So you've got CVSS, Common Vulnerability Scoring System. So that's a 0 to 10 scale, and you've probably heard about 9.8 critical vulnerabilities in software and systems. There's the NIST SP 830 Guide to Risk Assessments. That's quite a comprehensive approach, certainly worth looking at. And I've used that for doing medical device risk assessment. TIR 57 that we'll come on to, and that links nicely to 14971, and also NIST cybersecurity framework. Now, when it comes to the risk analysis, perhaps I'll tease this out at this point, actually, because a key difference between cyber and safety is you don't have P1, P2. You have to form a view as a cyber professional as to the level of risk. You can take a view on historic data, but that tends to feed your threat modeling. So in other words, there are lots of ransomware attacks, therefore, you know, the risk of ransomware attack on our systems is probably at the higher end. But generally you don't have the historical basis to do that. And also cyber moves at such a pace that if you were to take historical data, it could come out of date quite quickly. So that's something that is a difference. So you do a 5-point scoring or a 3-point scoring, high, medium, low, or very high through to very low. So that's a key difference in terms of how things are scored. But the rest of the principles apply in terms of 14971. So this is a key link between your cyber and your safety risk management. So PIR 57 provides a very good piece of guidance as to how to do this. So fundamentally, it recommends that you keep the two separate. So best practice is not to try and put the two together. So for the reasons that we talked about there. So safety, you've got probability and historic data, and it's also very well established. Cyber, you run a separate process, but you still need all the core components in there that Bijan talked about. You need a plan, you need methodology, a scoring system, and the control hierarchy is the same as well, but just from a cyber perspective. So you've got secure by design, so you build security into it, protective measures, information for security. So information for security is please don't please don't use a password that's easily guessable, for example, or please don't connect this system to something it shouldn't be connected to over Bluetooth. Sort of things that you can't necessarily stop someone from doing. But you see that the processes are very similar, but there's the interplay is the interesting thing. So when you're doing a cyber risk analysis, you need to have an eye on, could there be a safety implication for this particular cyber risk? And as a cyber professional, you have to take a very conservative view and then work with the safety risk professionals to hand it over for them to complete the analysis. And then it comes back to cyber because the impact level could change. So something that I thought might be a minor in terms of impact could become more significant having gone through the safety risk assessment, because actually the harm to the patient could be more significant than perhaps I thought, because that's not down to me to judge. I can only look at the cyber risk. So, and then you've got the interplay in terms of the controls. So a cyber control might impact safety, or a safety control might impact security. So you don't want a password preventing you performing, a critical function in terms of the device itself. So that's where you've got that interplay between the two. But fundamentally, you follow the same flow. You need the same traceability, but the main difference is around the sort of threat modeling you do up front, and then the fact you don't use probability when you're doing the risk assessment itself. So just to give you some sort of key takeaways, I mean, what Q&A, we can go into this a bit more, but key things to think about. And I've touched on some of these as we've gone. So look at the risks of each component and also a system level view as well. So quite often now you've got cloud systems and there might be more than one cloud system. So you might have a cloud system that looks after the devices and a cloud system that holds the patient data. You might have a mobile device, so a mobile phone that then talks to the medical device over Bluetooth. And then you've got the device itself. So it could be quite a complex ecosystem, and then all the different networks in between as well. So recommendations to look at each component separately and also the end-to-end for the reasons I touched on. So if you attack the cloud, you might compromise the whole fleet of devices. So it's important to think about that. So sometimes I find people forget the cloud systems almost. Perhaps it's because it's so well established, readily available. but they are a key target. Cloud systems are a key target because they tend to be that focal point where all the patient data is. But they also might be the focal point where all the control for all the devices is as well, or your updates for your devices come generally from the cloud system. So it's very important to protect the cloud and the communication and security between the cloud and the device. So you can't compromise, so that's my cloud system, that's my device. So you've got a root of trust between the two. So you've built that security model between the two. So the device knows it's the cloud system, the right cloud system, and vice versa. And there's all sorts of security techniques to make sure that happens. And another interesting link to Bijan's is the whole threats and risk across the entire product lifecycle. And this follows the whole secure by design. So right at the very beginning, when you're putting the device together, you should have cybersecurity requirements as part of your design inputs. So that ensures you're doing security by design, just like you're doing safety by design. So right up front, you need to think about how to protect the device. Manufacturing as well. So quite often this can be forgotten, but you might be embedding security keys in the device at the point of manufacture. So that's a key vulnerability. If those keys were to be exposed, someone was to get hold of them, they could compromise again all of your devices. Then shipping and transportation. So, there's a possibility of intercepts during shipping and transportation. Again, haven't seen many instances of this in the sort of med device world, but certainly elsewhere with other technology, we've seen a number of instances where critical things have been intercepted, diverted, modified, and then reintroduced into the supply chain. So it's certainly worth thinking about shipping. And then a key thing with devices lasting 5, 10, 15 years is how you keep them up to date when they're out in the field. So security updates, product updates, having a well-established mechanism to deliver those updates, to know when you need to deliver the updates as well. So getting the feeds of security information so vulnerabilities are there. And then the FDA have also said you need to do regular pen testing now, penetration testing on devices. So, and that's to ensure that they remain secure. So your pen testing is separate from your verification. So your verification does the whole traceability between your requirements and your risk controls, and that they're verified and done. Pen testing is someone putting themselves in the hacking space, basically. So despite all the measures you might have put in place, the pen tester will try and get in regardless. They'll tear the product down, they'll try and find a way in, and they might find things that you've missed. So that's why it's another critical measure to bring in place. And then we touched on disposal. So obviously you've got the whole environmental aspect to that, but from a security perspective, making sure a device is wiped of critical safety information, patient data, before it's disposed, or indeed if it goes through a repair cycle as well, a repair loop. That's another important consideration. So that whole life cycle view of cyber risk is important to consider. Bijan will be glad to hear this. So close collaboration with safety risk specialists is really important, because you've got that interplay between the two risk management systems and assessment systems. So making sure there is that interplay. As a cyber professional, one of the things that I need to do is make sure that, because we talk in quite complex language, and that's important, but then to capture it in a more simple piece of narrative to say, here's the impact on the device. So this communication would be lost. What would that then mean from a safety perspective? So the device is no longer communicating with perhaps another key functional feature. And as I've said, it's not down to cyber professionals to look at the safety implications. So it's very much a collaborative effort. So I might need to explain what the impact of the cyber risk might be, when that plays through, and then work with a safety specialist to sort of, tease it out as to what the associating hazard is and so on. Is it a new hazard, or does it link to something that already exists? And we touched on the fact that the impact scoring may change as a result of that in terms of your risk matrix. And we touched on secure by design as well. So, and looking at the key functions and performance of the product to protect. So, if right up front you look at that from that perspective and go, right, these are the features from a cyber perspective that we need to protect to keep patients safe. Again, you can do that analysis quite often up front to go, well, here's the core functionality, here's the core pieces of data that are absolutely essential that we need to protect at the highest level, versus all the other measures that you might need to put in place. So again, that's something that you can do.
Yeah, there was a question on that about USB, and they sort of somebody
Yes.
sort of answered that by saying potentially tamper-proof. So it's almost thinking about what might be a problem through design.
It is, yeah, it is. So USB is a classic one because, people can plug things in, and USB is a classic entry point for things like viruses and malware and so on. Because if people are lax with USB sticks, they can just not really know what's on them, plug them in, and then you've compromised the device. So yeah, it's worth thinking about, again, all the different routes in to a device. That could be Bluetooth as well.
Is there an element of benefit risk with cybersecurity as well? Because
There
obviously
is.
you could lock it down completely, but then you can't
There
do
is.
the updates required because
Yeah.
you can't even get insurance.
There is, yeah, because you could obsessively focus on something that doesn't really matter. It's not a key feature of the device, and lock it down to the highest level of security. So that there is that cost benefit analysis from that perspective. So and also looking at the risk options. So from a cyber perspective, you have to be balanced around the controls that you put in place, and make sure they are sort of rational. But equally well, there does need to be a bit of forward looking when it comes to cyber. So you need to think, well, actually, various things are likely to get worse. So there is an element of sort of predicting that to some degree, to go, actually, it would be sensible to try and protect this. Or you might look at what's happened in the wider market and see there have been lots of attacks by USB or by somewhere else, that then mean actually it makes sense to put additional measures perhaps over and above what you would normally do. So, but you're right, it is about cost as well.
One of the things that I've seen from my experience is that the risk benefit analysis from the safety side of it does not necessarily cover the cyber side of the implications. And I think they both are treated separately. And I think there's a bit of overlap between both of those to support the risk benefit analysis on either side of it.
Yeah. I mean, the interplay between the two is quite complex, actually, because on the one hand, you've got a sort of probability-based model, and on cyber, you've got something which is based on sort of high, medium, low. So you have to come to a view on that when it's passed across from a safety perspective.
Okay. So you said that you should keep safety in cyber very much part. I can see a lot from that. But I'm in usability.
Yes.
I'm not now sure where cyber risk sits where it comes to validating usability. So where would you put your cyber use errors? Because the harm isn't direct to the patient, but there's obviously a harm. But it's not safety harm. So I'm getting a little bit of a blur in one there.
So when you say cyber use errors, you're thinking about something that doesn't necessarily have a safety implication, but is a cyber related.
So if you're going to use a system, and it's got a whole bunch of cyber measures, and as a user, you start getting things wrong. So you put in a very insecure password, or start
Yeah.
messing with tamper seals, or you start blurting out stuff to people who really should be hearing this. These are use errors.
Yeah.
But where do we capture that?
So I would I would look at those generally within the cyber analysis. So things like password complexity, I would look at in the cyber analysis to say, you know, if there's a risk around passwords not being complex enough or something, to put some measures in place to do testing around passwords. But you've got the same hierarchy of control. So you can have some, you know, you can have cyber IFU, cyber instructions for use. Obviously, it's the least robust measure, but in some cases you know that's one of the things that you have to deploy, or it supports other measures that you've got in place.
And then the thing is that often, say, if you have used that in your UFMEA, you would then work with your cybersecurity specialists to see they are covered or captured in that cyber risk analysis that Andy is talking about. So they feed into that. And then
so that's kind of the domain of the usability expert.
Yeah.
But we're handing that over to cyber and just
There's a need to work together when it comes to user, to define like who does what. Yeah.
So
Between your UFMEA and what the cyber person expert would look at.
So I guess what I'm sort of heading towards is, do you see in the short medium future an equivalent to UFMEA, which would be cyber? So I guess would that be a UC?
So
well, maybe one aspect, Phil, is the, you know, like when you score, there's on the safety risk management side, you got the severity of it. The same way, there is an equivalent of that, and risk matrix has got the cyber side of it as well. So safety, we just say we got a score of 1 to 5 or whatever those are. But like for the cyber, not everything results into the safety.
Yeah.
But then there's a reputational risks, there's a legal implications, and there are different matrix which are parallel to that, and you try to score them against your organization's acceptability criteria. The same way is for safety, it would be for the other areas as well. And at some point, when there is a handover, you assess those aspects. So all non-safety aspects are typically done outside of the safety risk management, and they are handled through often the cyber team. But as Andy says, that needs to ensure that there are no gaps and they are evaluated currently, so that either you don't score because you say, well, safety, there's no implications, but then you feed them into Andy's cyber analysis, and he would then try to score for a non-safety related acceptability criteria.
But so how does this get tested?
I have also a question regarding the techniques.
Could you hold on online? There's a question being asked right now in the room, and then after that you can ask. Okay, your turn is next. Okay, did you hear that? Person online, did you hear that?
maybe they come off mute.
So sorry, go ahead, Phil. Yeah.
So I think from that perspective, that it's a question of that sort of division.
So
to make
may
sure
I ask the
that
question now?
coverage-
May I ask the question now or later?
Just wait a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Would the user not be considered the threat actor in that circumstance? So if they're
They-
putting a USB stick in or
They
using a
could
secure
be,
password, could they be considered a threat actor?
Yeah.
Feed into
Yeah,
that
they
analysis?
could be. So again, that's why it's a question of, just like we work with the safety risk professionals, also looking at usability. So on the project I worked with Mayor, we did exactly that. So but we made sure there wasn't an overlap, but there was no gaps equally well. So, but there is a bit of toing and froing there in terms of where it sits. To your point about who verifies it and where it sits, you know, does it sit in the UFMEA or does it sit in the cyber analysis? So
Did you mention cybersecurity? Did I hear that correctly? You said
yeah, for cyber, yeah, yeah. Typically not. No, typically you would incorporate it into your normal IFU documentation. So
that would be that knowledge to the user that is somehow run fire risk. Then that would be probably similar.
Then, like the cyber analysis control measures requirements that eventually fed into it and been informed to the usability lead, who would then ensure that those are also covered in there. And some of those things that you highlighted, you could test that through your, and not everything that you can test on a cyber perspective, because unless there's certain things that you'll have to just use your qualitative analysis or scoring, where you can't test everything.
We give a chance to the person online
Yeah,
to
yeah.
ask. Sir, whoever it was, I think it was Florian. Florian.
Yes, it is me. Thank you. Thank you. Can you tell us a little bit about the tools you are using for your risk or safety analysis? Is something like FTA, fault tree analysis, FMEA, or is something different? This would be the first question. And another one, it's about the assessment of the risk before, probability before the implementing the measures and after implementing the measures. What is your approach? Because in some cases it's difficult to assess what it will be the P1, P2 before the measures. Maybe you can elaborate about that, and if you can give some idea, like overall risk in terms of, I don't know, probability, combined probability for this kind of class 3 complex medical devices, hardware, software. Where is the state of the art? It will be interesting to hear from a specialist in software. Where are we right now? If we have the combined or risk probability or the most critical risks. I don't know if I was clear with there are basically several questions, but I would be glad to hear about that. What is your experience? And
so is that a cyber question, or are you thinking more general?
It's combined. So it's cyber and also a more general risk management question. First one was about the tools you are using, techniques. The second one, how you approach, the estimation of P1 and P2. And the third one is like an overview from you. Where are we exactly right now for complex medical devices in terms of probabilities or
Yeah. Okay. No, it's good question. So I think in terms of tools and techniques, I covered there's probably 3 different approaches in terms of the risk assessment. So NIST 830 would be one approach in terms of the scoring and the assessment of risks. You can use CVSS, or you can use another sort of model based on some other standards in terms of cyber risk assessment. I think, as I said earlier, one of the key things that we don't tend to do from a cyber perspective is use probability. So as a general rule, that's why the processes are separate. Because if we use probability, you could go, well, we could put the 2 together because you've got a common foundation. But in cyber, we use, high, medium, low, very high, medium, and it's down to the judgment of the cyber professional based on the threats, the likelihood of someone trying to attack the device. So it is a judgment call. Obviously, there is some historic data you could use, and I've seen some organizations have a kind of, for high, it would mean this kind of number of events per year, but it's a loose coupling. It's not a tight coupling.
there's another aspect. So that's about the comparison of probability versus a non-probabilistic scale. The other problem, the complexity that cybersecurity has is that in risk management, we are blessed with the fact that severity is very well understood. You know, we have catastrophic, critical, major, minor, negligible, right? But in cyber, there are different types of harms. It's not just human harm. So you have privacy, you have loss of data, unavailability. So then it's really hard to put it all on one scale of severity.
Yeah.
To calculate risk.
Yeah. And typically you have a matrix where the impact looks at each of those aspects and you would pick the highest. So, you know, a data breach might result in a high impact or a very high impact. But that's based purely on that data breach. So that's not patient safety necessarily. Mm-hmm. So your cyber impact matrix will tend to have multiple slices to it. It could be reputational damage, it could be financial impact, patient safety. So there's those different aspects to it. But certainly I would guard against using sort of hard probabilities or trying to use probabilities.
The FDA says don't.
Yeah, indeed. It's not very wise, I would say. So yeah, stick with a matrix. I don't know if that answered your question, but yeah, I think as Bijan says, the guidance is pretty clear on that, not to use probability for cyber.
Well, we've reached our 5 o'clock mark. So I think the plan is to now Q&A. No break, right?
Oh, well, we could have a 5 minutes break.
Yeah, let's take another 5-minute break and take a breather, and then we'll continue till 5:30 with the Q&A. Jen, ask anything you want.
Also wanted to check if we can take a picture of from the behind and if that can be okay for everybody here.
Yeah.
So if I could
Sure.
just check.
Well, from the back of their heads, I think should be
Yeah,
okay.
the back of the heads is
Yeah.
fine.
I'll stand so you can take the front. Let me give permission.
So just from
You want
privacy side
wanna
of
stand
it,
up so we
are you okay if we take a picture from the back end if you are not sure wanting your faces maybe see this way?
And if you're okay with the front, we can take it from this angle too.
And you turn around that way if you don't want.
But yeah, go ahead. Fine. So we are restarting. By the way, I meant to ask a question for people online. Has it come across okay as far as audio visual quality? Have you been getting it? Oh, good.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So here
Yes,
we
it
are.
works. It works
Okay.
good.
By the way, I moved this incoming sound to our overhead speakers, so now we are hearing you very loud and clear. In case you don't know.
Yeah, very loud.
Yeah. So yeah, Q&A session. Rachel has had her hand up for a while, so let's maybe give her a first chance, and then we'll continue with the room. Go on, Rachel. Maybe she's left the room. Somebody else.
Quick question.
Yes.
What's your take on considering probably that there's a single hazard with a single hazardous situation, but now we can have a range of very
Oh, absolutely.
and then we have probabilities. What's your take on taking this full spectrum of different options, pathways, future scenarios, just for one line item?
So I need to restate your question because the microphone is in the front. And tell me if I got your question properly. He says for one hazard to a hazardous situation, you can create a range of severities of harm. How do we handle that? Or is there more detail to that, or is that?
No. It's a very complex question. Not a question. A very complex situation where you suddenly overcomplicate potentially your analysis, analysis parameters, because you have probabilities for so many things, and then you have multiple entries. How would you deal with such a spectrum of cases? Would you simplify it? Would you go ahead and
It actually, in the quantitative method that I teach, is also in my book, it's already built in and it's not complex. It's very well handled. So for one row of your risk traceability matrix, which goes from the hazard to hazardous situation to harm, you then have 5 columns, one for each of the 5 grades of severity of harm. And each of those has a different P2 number. So you have 5 P2s and 1 P1. So you can cover the entire spectrum in one row. In fact, this is advisable because a lot of times companies choose one severity. And the worst case is typically is not the highest risk. It's the highest severity, but it's not the highest risk. Typically, the worst case has a low probability of happening, which means it has a small P2. But maybe a medium severity has a highest probability. So then if you choose the worst case, you actually calculate a small risk, which is not right. You actually have a bigger risk. Did that make sense? So if you have a P1, okay, let me just try to illustrate some more. It's just some little puzzle look. Let's say my P1 is 1%. And the probability of receiving a minor, let's talk about infection. Probability of getting a major injury, major means moderate severity, which means you take some medication and you overcome your infection. Let's say 80% of the people are in that situation. And then you have 1% of the people die from that infection. If you take the worst case severity, then you take 1% P1 times 1% P2, the 10 to the minus 4, that is your risk. You think, oh, 10 to the minus 4, okay, it seems kind of small. But then if instead of multiplying it by 0.01, if you had to multiply it by 0.8, or I said 80%, then it would be 0.08 or 8, 0.008 percent, 8 in 1,000, not 1 in 10,000. So you actually have artificially made your risk look small by taking the worst case. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Maybe I've got a question and something that always came about in the risk management, and it's often where companies, when they're developing their products first time, I've seen where they go through some means of estimating quantitative without even having the product out or having any testing to reference to. Or sometimes they think about, oh, it's unlikely to occur, therefore is 1 in million or 1 in 10 million. And what they do is translate that from the qualitative to quantitative before having the real world data or some sort of testing.
Mm-hmm.
And I see that quite a lot in the industry. And I think because one of the benefit of ISO 14971 is it doesn't tell you how to do it.
Yeah.
It gives you quite much open.
Yeah.
And therefore it is very open to interpretation and the way you like, and there's no right or wrong answer.
It is advisable that if you don't have quantitative data, not to use quantitative data, to just use qualitative. The problem is that it's hard to multiply medium, the word medium, by 0.6%.
Yeah.
How do you multiply? So as a result, what they do is even though they give quantitative numbers, they are really not real numbers. They are representative of something like a medium or a low or a high, so that they can do the math multiplication. So you just, as long as you're aware that these numbers are not real, they're just some kind of arranged to give you the ability to do the math, it's okay. And also, we know that we have to do post-market surveillance. So our numbers, even though they may be an initial guess, will eventually over time get better by collecting field data and improving our data, our initial guesses.
Just linking that to the software risks, and that also comes up quite often. And we saw quite a few questions earlier, where you have say single P1 score and a 5 or whatever the considering the P2 scores.
Yeah.
But there are also 1.1 or 1.2 and all of that, the sequence of events and how you
Oh.
are do those probability, because it makes, to Janusz's point, the whole matrix quite complex because you have four different sequence of events
Yeah.
resulting into that, or
Okay.
sometimes it's fine. So I have to manage that if you have Excel as a tool.
Okay.
Or
Okay. Was that what you were thinking about? Okay. All right. No, great. Okay, so what we're talking about is the multiple sequences of events that can arrive at the same hazardous situation. Right? Let's imagine I can have a sharp, getting your hand cut is a hazardous situation and exposure to the sharp. A sharp may be built in from manufacturing, or it may happen during use, like somebody may crack or break something and then expose a sharp edge, or maybe due to wear, something eventually wears out, or maybe a protective measure falls off, the cap falls off or something. These are all different pathways and they have different P1s. That is true. So how do we resolve that? In the quantitative method, there's an algorithmic method using Boolean algebra that you can compute the resolution of all these different pathways and you can resolve it to one number, one P1 number. That is possible. That's the beauty of the quantitative method. It's just so easy. You can get a computer to do it for you. And it's also explainable. The only thing is that sometimes we don't have real data and then you have to, estimate and then qualify that this is a guess, this is my best guess right now. Yes, sir, in the back. Yes.
So sometimes it's challenging to get clinicians to estimate things once they're not very familiar with probabilities, so especially when probabilities get low, then your estimates become somewhat erratic. But also there are other times where you might have hazardous situations that clinicians have never seen or hopefully will never see because they are ideally events that the P1 ends up being so low that they never really happen. How do you deal with getting clinicians to make reasonable estimates of P2 in some of those scenarios?
Okay, so the question for people online, if you are trying to estimate P2s, clinicians may have had different experiences and give you different P2 numbers, right? And sometimes they also ask them to estimate P2 for different hazardous situations, and they may have not seen that hazardous situation. So we don't ask clinicians to estimate P1s. That's engineering. The thing is that, this funny thing is that a lot of times when I have interviewed clinicians to try to get P2, they answer P1. It's because the way they think about things, like I ask them, if a person is infected, what's the likelihood of them dying? And they say, oh, the chances of them getting infected is like 1 in 100. They're giving me a P1, I'm asking for a P2. So I have to continuously steer their thinking. Okay, now let's assume they're infected already. Now what? So, and that's why P2s, if properly created, are independent of P1 and you can reuse them. If you infect a person by sneezing on them or by touching them or by, some other, touching a doorknob, the body doesn't care how the bacteria or the virus came to it. It says, I'm infected now. It came somehow. But the doorknob and the sneeze and the touch have different probabilities. Those are different P1s. The doctor can say, well, the clinician can say, the person has been exposed to this virus. Now I'm going to tell you, based on my historical data of the people who have been infected, so many people died, so many people got critical injury, major, minor, and negligible.
I think one of the complications that I've seen is that usually there are, in any simple Excel, typically there are two P scores. One is P1 and P2. And if, for example, in the software case, P1 is 100%, and then P2 is often used to reduce the probability through design in other means. And then there is also P2 from a perspective. I'm saying P2, meaning that after P1, another probability.
P also?
Yeah. P also. And then there is a P2, which a clinician is supposed to provide, which is independent to P1 to Bijan's point. But then it's not considered and often it is merged. And then it gets quite complicated for clinician to work that out because there's just you're combining either that
piece of H.
Yeah, the P also is into with the P1 or P2, and it's not necessarily separated out clearly. So to your point, it would be good that if all of those, if P 1.1, and I'm just trying to simplify, P 1.1 is 100% software, and if P 1.2 is another independent hardware means to
Mhm.
do that, then it becomes P1.2 to become P1, and then the P2 would still be the score provided by the clinician.
Right.
And I think that's the complexity that I see that often is not done, or it's too complex in Excel to manage.
Mhm.
And that's why some of the software can be quite helpful to manage these if they are configured or have those ability.
Just to double check, the P2 would be provided by the clinician. Is it going to be a different set of P2s for different hazardous situations, or is it the same P2 for all of the hazardous situations?
The question is that different P2s for different hazardous situations, or is it the same?
Yeah, like are you going to have a set of P2s for like
P
exposed to electricity and stuff? Because the reason why
Yeah.
I'm checking is because I can already predict someone going to clinicians and going, can you tell us what's the likelihood of a person dying from infection? And then coming, well, how did they get infected? With what?
Yes,
Where?
yeah,
Within their body? And
yeah.
then kind of guess
So,
that P2.
this is that. This I covered this in class 102. I teach a lot of physicians and nurses on this particular question. So this is part of the art of risk management now. This is not going out of the science and the art. Is that how do I create a list of harms? Because if I talk about infection, so if you can't ask somebody what is the likelihood of somebody dying from an infection, because it depends what part of their body was infected, by what pathogen. Did they get a brain infection or small toe infection? You know, they're different, and what it could be bacterial, viral, fungal, and what was the condition of the patient? Did they have some comorbidities? It's huge, right? So, okay, now the question becomes, do I create 1,000 rows of just the word infection, 1,000 rows of different pathogens, different people, different parts of the body? You can do that and you can get a precise P2. Or you can collapse it into fewer rows and lose precision, but make your P2 list more manageable. This is the art. What's the resolution that you want? How big do you want it to make? That's up to you. And of course, the advice is to use the approach that's most practical for your company and your product.
There's also been interesting comments raised about it depends which country or which market you're in, what the P2s are likely to be because of the follow-up healthcare that's
right. Yeah. So people online could hear Natalie was saying that it depends on what geography this person got infected, for example, because different healthcare is available. If you are saying that, you know, it's deep Sahara and there's nobody around and you get infected, likely you're going to die. But then if you get infected while you're in the hospital getting some other care, well, likely you're going to get the best care because doctors and nurses and medications, everything is right around you already. That's another angle.
Now, I wonder how many companies would have multiple versions of their risk management by country.
Well,
it depends where having clinicians globally, so you get a insight from all over the world, and so you get an overall picture rather than having lots of different. You just get an overall global picture for your risk management. Would that be a good approach?
I haven't I haven't seen different risk management files for different geographies. Maybe it exists, I just haven't seen it. But it's true that, I mean, maybe we assess risks for somebody who lives in England and you have good healthcare, and then you sell the same product maybe in India. Well, you're estimating risks are low, but maybe actually they're not so low over there. So, yeah. Yes.
Have you ever seen examples of devices with multiple indications for use where the different indications have potentially different attitudes for the same adverse situation and how you dealt with that?
Well, if there are different indications for the same device, no, I haven't seen different. They're saying different risk management files for different indications.
Wow.
You can't. Well, if the device has multiple indications, then it's possible that you can't control who uses it for what indication, right? So once you release the device, people can use it for whatever. I would say you have to consider all of the indications in one risk management file.
Would you take the worst case P2 or
Maybe help me with an example that'll help me better model this.
an example might be for the same hazardous situation, the P2 may be different for a different age group of patient. So
Okay. Question is what if you have this device indicated for young people and old people, let's say, but for old people, it has higher risk. Well, then I just take the old people's level of risk because the young people are already less exposed to risk than the older people. Yeah, in that case, I'll take the worst case. Same device, same therapy, just different population groups.
Also, embedded system, sometimes failure of the software is not caused directly by software itself. For example, it's by hardware.
Yeah.
I mean, just more specifically, let's say a memory fault cause a software failure and lead to a hardware situation, and then some other. So in that situation, I'm even not sure what is the P2, what is the P1, because the software failure it's just so difficult to estimate what it can cause. It can be anything.
Okay.
And as well as P1, because this is a hardware failure, cause software failure.
Yeah.
And if we identify the software failure is not 100%, and the hardware failure is more kind of very difficult to give a realistic sort of probability, how to handle this sort of situation, what is the more kind of the practical way?
So I'm going to try to just kind of summarize the question for people online also. Imagine a hardware failure causes a software failure and that causes harm. So how do we estimate risk? In this case, usually hardware failures, you can more readily estimate the probability of failure. Failure of microchip, failure of a bit flip or things like that, you can more easily estimate the probability for that. The software is the one that we're told there's no consensus on how to estimate it, so let's call it 1. So in that case, actually life is easier because you take the known probability of hardware failure, multiply it by 1, which is the probability of the software failure, then find your P2, multiply it by your P2, and you can calculate your risk.
Yeah, but the P2, how we can find out that? Because a software failure is kind of very generic way. It can happen on any forms.
Well, if you're talking about a hazardous situation, excuse me, people online, that I'm not repeating everything because unless like you can come stand to the front. The software failure, software doesn't harm people by itself. It's just instructions. So software will drive a hardware device to do something. Let's say if it's a surgical robot, maybe it could cause an unintended motion. The knife just jumps forward. Okay. So then the question becomes, if to the clinician, because now we want to know what's P2. If then, like on this type of operation that you're doing, let's say, doing some particular abdominal surgery, the knife jumps forward by 2 centimeters. What kind of things can happen? And they may say, okay, may have bleeding, you may cut something, damage an organ or something. Okay, so let's say we have 2 things. We have liver damage and bleeding. And then you can say, okay, for this type of a cut, 2 centimeter, in this area of the body, the kind of bleeding is as normal to expected to happen. What are the likely consequences of that? And you may say, well, for this kind of bleeding, 1% chance that somebody could die, 3% chances that they're going to get some kind of a irreversible damage, 75% chance that we can fix it, patch it up, and just so, because we are already in the body, and so on. It gives you numbers like that. Okay, that's P2 for bleeding. Now give me the P2 for liver damage. a 2 centimeter cut in the this particular like biliary part of the liver, what do you think could be the consequences of that? So then you create your two P2s for the one hazardous situation of the knife jumping forward by 2 centimeters. And that's caused by the software failure. So software failure, the software failure and the hardware failure that caused the software failure, the knife jumping forward, that's the hazardous situation. That stops, that's P1. Now we go to the P2 world. Now we go to talk to the clinicians. Engineering talks about the software failure, the knife movement, the sharpness of the knife. Yeah, you're welcome. Andy is feeling lonely. Nobody's asking any question.
You had a question about this calculation or calculator for the P1 composite. What was called the tool or the technique?
Boolean algebra. Mathematical.
Boolean. Boolean. Okay. Okay. I got it. Okay.
I'll start off by saying I don't know much about cybersecurity, so I'm not sitting, but there's a lot of medical devices that have apps that you can install for them, and you install them on someone's phone, a computer, iPad that you don't necessarily can control, can test, and stuff like that. So how do you prevent or check that the information won't be hacked or leaked, or some silly mistake happens and it spread out the private information from someone's personal device? And two, once the device that is used with this app is like off the market, either the person binned it or it broke, they don't use it anymore, but they still have the app with all of this private information on there. How do you dispose or store that information without sort of going to private device?
Yeah, so good question
Could you
about
repeat the question?
yeah. So if you've got an app, of course, lots of devices now have an associated app. It sits on basically an uncontrolled device, so anyone's mobile phone. So it's a question of what measures you put in place around that to protect the data and the app itself. So that would come out through the risk analysis, actually, in terms of cyber. So there's probably two aspects that you'd look at there, or maybe three top level risks. So the first one is, has someone compromised my app? And again, there are techniques to and measures that you can put in place to protect the app itself. So if someone compromised the app, you would know that, and you could then stop it running or delete data or flag it to the user. This app is compromised. So that's the first thing. That could be compromised by a virus or whatever it happens to be. When it comes to the data itself, depending on the sensitivity, the main thing is to encrypt it. So that means even if it is compromised or leaked, no one can actually unpack it and know what's in it. So particularly if it's sensitive data, you want to have that encryption. Most modern mobile devices now have all of that built in to actually quite a high level. So you've already got within Android and iOS that capability. It's just a question of getting your software developers to use it and to encrypt the data appropriately. When it comes to kind of disposal and end of life, again, if it's encrypted, there's less of a problem because even if someone else got hold of the device, they couldn't get hold of the data. But typically you should encourage the user, once they finish, to delete the app, and then that would delete all the data as well. Another way of doing it is if you've got a central system, you can recognize that user has been disconnected or is no longer using it, and then the app could be deleted, if you like, remotely, so you know they're no longer using it. They're no longer signed up to the service, so you can go, right, this no longer works. So you can put a whole range of measures in place to protect that. But it's a very good question, and it's something that a lot of organizations wrestle with because it's something outside of your control. But the best thing is to protect the app and protect the data associated with it.
Online, there's still this interest in the intruder physical side of things. So a bit like the USB.
Yeah.
And I've gone back to them and sort of said tamper-proof in etc. But I think online they seem to want a little bit more than that. So
Yeah, I
is there
mean,
anything you can sort of cover on that
So-
topic?
so like when it comes to USB, typically us cyber folks go, "Whoa," you know, because USB is quite problematic. So we would prefer to steer away from it as far as possible.
I think what has
because-
happened is that some of the people online actually have the systems that are quite, you know, are sort of
Yeah.
established in the field.
Yeah, if you've
And that is the issue for them. I
yeah,
think.
if you've got legacy devices,
Yeah.
then I think you need to look at other measures to put in place. And there's a whole set of guidance that's been issued around cybersecurity for legacy devices.
Oh,
So I didn't really talk about legacy devices. It is a real headache, but there's all sorts of guidance there. So it may have USB ports that perhaps weren't originally, you know, were too easily accessible. So it's a
Yes.
question of putting other measures in place wherever you can to make sure there's some sort of protection there, to make sure people know that they shouldn't plug anything in, or you put a physical barrier in place
Okay.
so that only, you know, field engineers can access it. Even then, for us as cyber folks, field engineers, again, you've got to protect their laptop as well,
Yes.
because quite often they'll access things they shouldn't do, and then the laptop gets infected, the USB gets infected, and the device gets
Actually, I
infected.
mentioned field
Yeah.
engineers, support engineers.
So again, you
Yeah.
need to have robust. It's a whole set of people, process, and technology to protect the laptops, the field engineering approaches, to make sure they're robust. So you know you don't provide that route into compromising the device.
Okay. Is there any on a PA or someone that they could refer to?
I'm happy to have a discussion about that.
Okay.
You know, but it's a topic all on its own. Legacy, because it's, you know, because the limitations of what you can do, because it wasn't secure by design in the first place. So you're having to put fundamentally countermeasures in place. So
Okay, thanks very much, Andy.
Right. So thank you very much. And, you know, the in-person participants, we still have a happy hour here. So that there will be more opportunity to pick Bijan and Andy's brains and have a discussion as well. So we got some refreshments here, and the online attendees, thank you so much as well. We won't be able to pass this on online, but we would love to if there is a possibility. But I'd like to close with thanks a lot for the active participation, and I think it was quite engaging, good questions, and I'd especially like to thank both of our speakers. They did a brilliant job. And again, as I said, for in-person participants, there will be an opportunity to speak to them and pick more on questions, ideas, and share your thoughts as well. And some of you would like to come and visit PA. We'd love to show around our laboratories and what we do. And I know that we couldn't organize that around here, and then people online as well. Happy to have a discussion. As Andy said, we could have a dedicated discussion of any of the areas that we would like to explore further. On that note, I'd just like to close, and any closing remarks, Bijan or Andy?
No, that's it. It was a great session. I really enjoyed it. And thank you for all the active and engaged questions and participation. Thank you, Andy, for your wonderful presentation. So you can reach out to either one of us. As I said, you will receive the slide decks. The session has been recorded, so that's also available. And that's it. Have a good day. Bye. People online.